Are you kinda bored with the champions you're currently playing and interested in something new? Then what about our OP picks for the lower elo in patch 2.4D? And with that, welcome back to another ProGuides Wild Rift video. So let's just start with Garen. A few patches ago, this champion has been the most picked and most annoying champion over the course of a patch. It was frequently utilized into Fiora because she had trouble dealing with him. However, a new build and some other strategies, plus nerfs to him as a champion, put him out of the meta. However, this doesn't mean he's a weak champion at all. He's very easy to pilot, has little to few mechanics, and is overall a super tanky character. The more tanky a character is, the easier it is for you to play him, because there's more room for you to make errors, which makes it genuinely more relaxing to play. So what exactly makes Garen in specific OP for the lower elo bracket? Number 1, his passive ability. If Garen hasn't been dealt damage for the last 5 seconds by enemy champions, he regenerates a percentage of his missing HP over time. This is quite insane if you talk about sustain in lane. Another thing that makes him absolutely annoying to deal with is his second ability called Courage. With this ability, he reduces the incoming damage and gains bonus tenacity. So whenever you identify a burst trade incoming or major damage sources going your way, just smash this ability and see you take no damage at all. But for this, you have to get the timing right. So at least read the ability once, so you grow familiar with what it does. In terms of mechanics, otherwise I recommend you auto-attack and use your first ability Decisive Strike to cancel your auto-attack. With that you gain increased damage in a trade, and afterwards you go into your judgment. Another funny fact about Garen is that with Demacian Justice, you basically leap after a champion even if they flash over a wall. It looks quite funny and it just sometimes happens, and it's always satisfying to watch. So how do we play this champion in lane? Whenever the enemy champion goes for a last hit, we want to threaten him. We want to be close to a minion and then trade him with an auto attack into our first ability's reset. Then afterwards, yet again, our third ability. Then we repeat this process once or twice, and then the enemy can't play anymore. And once we get to our level 5, if the enemy is sub 30%, they just instantly die to our ultimate ability. And here comes a little trick when you face something like a Fiora. A Fiora below 40% HP always has to parry your first ability if you have your ultimate available. If she doesn't do so, you will just kill her with ult because she's silenced, so she can't riposte anymore. So all you have to do is bait and riposte with your first ability and then get her killed. If she however ripostes your first ability, then all you have to do is wait and then kill her afterwards. There's little she can do about that if you're already winning. Also, thanks to her little scaling on her passive ability compared to the PC version, she needs specific items to deal with you. If she doesn't get them, she has no way of killing you unless you make mistakes. So if you're new to the Baron lane and just want to relax a bit with a good champion, just pick Garen and relax a bit. Otherwise, if you're more on the aggressive side, you could just pick Darius here. But it all comes down to your preference and your ability to pilot those champions. But given the level of practice you have to input into a champion, Garen is one of the easiest to pick up and easiest to master champions to grow familiar with the role and carry games anyway. So with that done, let's move on to our question of the day. What was the very first champion you've learned to play in Wild Rift? Let me know in the comments below. The next pick on this list is Amumu. Yeah, you've heard right, Amumu. Now let's think about why we put Amumu here. In the lower brackets, there's a lot of fighting happening. So in those fights, having AoE CC is something that's unbelievably broken. And there's also something about Amumu that not many people actually know. His passive ability, Curse Touch. Attacks curse the enemy target to take an additional 10% true damage from incoming magic damage for 3 seconds. That's a lot of damage if you have a dedicated magic damage dealer. For example, a Corki. Even though Corki is an AD carry, most of his damage, 80% from his auto attacks, and all of his spells deal magic damage. So with this, they even deal more damage, which is never a bad thing. And then you slap an Abyssal Mask on top of that, and you increase his damage by millions. But why exactly did we put Amumu here? Similar to Garen, Amumu is an easy to pilot champion. There's not much you have to look out for apart from hitting your bandage shots on the enemy. And even if that doesn't work out, there are still options such as a proto belt or a flash to get close enough to press the Curse of the Sad Mummy. Once this ability is pressed, well, the enemy can't move for 1.5 seconds and they're stunned. So your team has plenty of chances to get rid of them. And yet again, on top of that, we can build super tanky. So even if we make an error, there's not much we can actually suffer from. Another thing that's important to mention here is the circumstance that even if we have a bad game, meaning we're like 0-5 or anything like that, we will still hold value because, yet again, our champion has a lot of crowd control. And this is something we should never ever underestimate. Whenever you're facing a lot of crowd control, you will always have to fear the impact of that. Even a 0 and 10 Rammus can taunt you and then his teammates can pummel you to death. So even that the enemy is weak doesn't change the fact that he can still get you killed. He's just not the primary reason or not the primary damage to do so. And with that we go to the next champion that kind of buffs other champions in terms of damage and other utility. And here we have Lulu. Realistically speaking, you could put this champion in the low elo and the high elo, because this champion scales insanely well. It does so because standalone it deals a lot of damage and is annoying, and if you slap a good player next to it. And all that because she does crazy well with hyper carries. One reason for that is a passive ability called Pix the Fairy Companion. Every time somebody uses an auto attack and the person has the Pix on him, it deals bonus damage on hit. And it's not just a bit of damage, it's insane. As we reach a later point in the game, and Lulu has a little bit of AP, it's way more than 100 damage per attack. Do you realize how much that is? However, it sadly doesn't proc on Runan's multiple projectiles. I mean, that would be just too broken, right? But that is just one thing. The next thing is called Whimsy, her second ability. It gives you movement speed and attack speed. And on top of that, you can polymorph an enemy to become a useless little cute critter that is unable to do anything but run with a slowed speed. So if you're thinking about that, Lulu is basically a champion that dopes your AD carry. It's literally a champion that turns your AD carry onto a champion that is on steroids. So whenever AD carries are super strong, this champion will shine even more. And surprise, AD carries are kinda busted right now. However, as broken as they might be, they can still die quite fast. And thanks for that, Lulu has an answer, her shield ability and her ultimate ability. It basically saves any AD carry from any harm, especially if she's very proficient in using her second ability to polymorph incoming harm. Nonetheless, there are a few things you have to look out for when playing Lulu. Your cooldowns really matter. You don't just want to use them for fun. Every cooldown used should serve a purpose. So you see a fight, so you use your spells. You see a fight your AD carry could get to with the power of your Whimsy, do so. But don't just use the spells to clear a wave, because you never know what could happen shortly after. You might get ganked, or the people might wait in the brush for you to make exactly that mistake. So whenever you're using those spells, please pay attention to what is happening around you. Don't let yourself get caught with nothing available. And to make sure you offer the most stats possible, you take Airy for runes for a bigger shield or for an extra shield. In summoner spells you take Flash and Heal and sometimes Exhaust. And for the build, you always want Ardent. Your champion is just super strong by giving even more stats with this item. And for your enchantment, you want Lucidity boost with either a Redemption or a Locket. For that decision, you look at the enemy team. Are they very burst heavy or do they poke you a lot? They jump into your team, for example a J4 with a cannon, Locket becomes very broken. If they're poking you and just overall annoying with, for example, a Lux, take Redemption. And now let's move on to our next pick, Graves. However, it's not the Graves for the jungle role, it's a lane Graves. Lane Graves is super easy to pilot. We can basically just push the wave on cooldown and annoy the enemy with our superior damage and mobility. For that you want to take Conqueror, Flash and Barrier, and for items, there comes a spicy combination of items, Bloodthirster, Infinity Edge, Phantom Dancer, Death's Dance and Mortal Reminder. However, depending on what you're facing and how the game is going, you can swap around those items after the Bloodthirster. However, the Bloodthirster will be your core item. You want to permanently sustain a lane and never be pushed away. And as the game goes on, those items will grant you unbelievable amounts of damage and sustain and tankiness. And in case you didn't know, Graves is especially good into physical damage champions. His third ability called Quick Draw grants him more armor per stack if he's dashing towards enemies. Those stacks grant him 6 to 18 armor depending on the level, and he can hold up to 8 stacks at one time, which effectively translates into up to 144 bonus armor. Now combine that with Tabai, and how do you exactly die into physical damage with that build? You don't really, unless you get CC'd for ages and can't do anything in return. So how exactly do we play this pick? With this champion, we usually kill the closest targets available to us. Other than that, in some situations we might even flash through the front line and try to one-shot the back line. Exactly for this we have a lot of crit and bonus damage. But you'd honestly be surprised how well we deal with tanks. Apart from things like Malphite and Rammus, those are specifically different. But even to them, we still deal a lot of damage. And if there's one thing that makes Grace extra annoying, it's his smokescreen ability. Ask anyone. Everybody hates this ability. You literally cannot see anything. And not seeing anything is basically like being crowd controlled. And if you think about that in the later stages of the game, there's nothing you can do. You'll just get killed by another carry on Graves' team. That is obviously if he didn't kill you himself yet. And now let's move on to the very last pick on this list. Here comes Kaisa. Yeah, it's again a Kaisa, and Kaisa will remain one of the best solo QAD carries for multiple reasons. Upon getting the first evolve on her first ability, her damage skyrockets. She can one-shot waves, she can one-shot people she faces in a 1v1 scenario, and she's overall super annoying to deal with. She can go invisible with her third ability if she has enough attack speed, and she can relocate herself in a teamfight when she needs to do so. Obviously if she has the mark on somebody, which conveniently is applied by any ally with any form of CC. However, Kaisa has a very high skill ceiling in terms of camera management. You can be aware of many things and capitalize on them. However, the skill floor for Kaisa to function well is relatively low and easy to pick up. So whatever elo you're in and however confident you're feeling in your own ability to play, she will be just as easy to pilot as any other champion you may think of. You might have to get used to how she works in the sense that she actually one-shots waves and one-shots people in a 1v1 scenario, which isn't really often the case when it comes to AD carries. They normally take a little bit more time, especially in the item department. And for you to make the most out of the pick up Conqueror with Vampirism. The healing is insane, it's so nice to have. For summoner spells, the typical flash and barrier suffice, and for the build, always. And by always I mean always. Rush a BF sword, an Executioner's Calling, and a longsword. With those three components, you will get the fastest and the easiest and cheapest way towards your first ability's evolve. Which then means you're not going to lose any fight anymore, unless you literally jump in the enemy team. And that's it for today. Thank you all for watching, and if you're not tired of me yet, make sure to hit that sub button so we see each other tomorrow once again. See ya.